Hello, everyone. Welcome, everyone here in Zoom. Also, everyone connected to our stream or streaming in Facebook. My name is Fabio Capra Ribeiro. I am the academic coordinator of the Master in Advanced Architectural Buildings and Biocities here in IAAC. And that's important because Marcia was the academic coordinator just before me. So she knows a lot about the Master, our IAAC, what we are doing here and everything. So it's my pleasure to present her today and her lecture, Constructive Narrative. Marcia is a founding member of a founding partner of Ashrafi Zad Design with professional experience in Iran, Lebanon, Spain, and West Coast USA. Working with digital tools and advanced technologies, she's interested in how design impacts environments, advocates social equity, and celebrates a local to global sense of culture and identity. Zad has pursued an applied research agenda on the topic of non-developable and complex manifolds in lightweight constructions since 2016. She is currently part of an international research consortium focused on the use of lightweight structures in adaptive refugees housing. That is also an adjunct faculty of architecture teaching at the University of Oregon in the USA and the University in California, also in the USA. So after this short presentation and a lot of adrenaline because she had a problem with her computer just before starting the presentation, and she had to look for a new one. Now you can share your presentation. Start, Marcia. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Fabio, for that introduction. I'll share my screen now. Well, hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to spend some time with you tonight. I do wish that we could be all together in IAAC's amazing lecture hall instead of mostly at home and probably also partially in our pajamas. But on a positive note, this way I can welcome friends who might be joining from different parts of the world. So thanks for being here, especially anyone from Iran, as it is actually 11 o'clock at night here. And it's the new year, so Nowruz Mubarak be hamegi to all Persians everywhere. And I think the easiest way to give focus to our discourse tonight is to frame a question that I think we have all often asked ourselves, and that is, what is the role of design? And to start moving into an answer for that question, I will start with a general backstory to myself and the year 2020 that we recently put behind us. I'm the type of person who often gets mired in the existential meaning of things. And one thing I've always struggled with is, how are architects useful in the world? When I was 14 years old, I decided I knew I wanted to be an architect. And at that time, if you asked me why, I had two answers ready. One was that I was enamored with beautiful built spaces that create memorable experiences and a sense of identity. And two, I wanted to make things better through design. I was 14 and very naive, and I was very much entrenched in social political issues. But as I worked and taught and did research and grew and changed, my understanding of the relevance of design and what architects essentially do changed. What I implicitly learned was that the world had lost confidence in architecture, and as a consequence, architecture had isolated itself in this type of self-congratulatory design, or sort of something that we can know as architecture for the sake of architects. Well, then 2020 happened, and it was a year that was difficult for a lot of us. Many people I knew lost their jobs or lost their lives. Friends that I had who were artists or entertainers were forced to face the delicate relationship between their passion and livelihood. And two places that I felt that I really belonged to faced these social political issues that created a collective trauma, I think. At the start of the year, the Iranian government shot down a civilian plane with no survivors. And in the US, the death of George Floyd forced Americans to face the reality of institutional racism and inequality. But for me personally, I think that things became unbearable with the explosion that happened in Beirut. I'm not sure if it was because I'd lived in Beirut and I'd fallen in love with the people and the city, or if as an architect, my heart breaks more with the destruction of a city. Or perhaps I intuitively understood that our cities house our collective identity and sense of pride, and the destruction of a city takes away more than just livelihood and security. And that day, and often after, I thought to myself, how does design have an impact? And how, as designers, can we change the status quo and promote equity and spatial justice? And how can we design with a conscience? Because we all have to be fighting for something more than just beautiful environments or functional buildings. And looking back now, I find some clarity in the work that we've done, me with my team and collaborators, people I've worked with. And tonight, I would like to share the answers that I found in the context of 8 projects. So project 1 is a very small piece of furniture. We were commissioned to populate a broad but sad-looking and empty walkway outside of Bouali University in Hamadan with several urban furniture pieces. The municipality wanted to activate the area and make it more socially vibrant through a minimum effort in infrastructure. So for us, the big question was, how can we do this? How can we bring together people through furniture that is responsive to the cultural context and creates a sense of identity and a place to belong and to be? And we didn't want to find a superficial response to this question. So we tried to develop a framework that could implicitly make this connection for people without using obvious archetypes. And to do that, we looked at historical paradigms in Persian architecture, specifically the Chalipa or the Persian 9 square. So the thing about the Chalipa is that it's a organizational structure that's often used, well, historically used in Persian building archetypes. And so we really thought that this was a good point to start our design from. Persian architecture is really rooted in geometry systems, especially this, the Chalipa. You can find it throughout the years, from ancient times, centuries ago, all the way through our modern era, that Persian architects really draw on this type of organizational structure to drive their design. So we thought that it was a good point for us to start with also. So for us, we kind of used it a bit differently. We started with that form generation grid. And within that framework, we sort of played, we developed geometries and offset the geometries and created variations with them and lofted them together to finally end up with a furniture piece that looked like this. We had a lot of different ideas for this, how people can connect to each other, how they can connect to the environment. And have a multi-use setting that I will get into later. So we also made a lot of different iterations of this, always using the 9 square, as you can see here, but creating a lot of very different and I think very beautiful pieces that all sort of connect to that one unifying root grid design as an identity indicator. And we also thought a lot about different seating settings. So as I said earlier, we thought about how people might like to occupy the space, how they might want to connect together and talk with each other. So we had this version which was like internal or internally centered. And then we had other options where people could create their own small space and enjoy the environment. And basically have a lot of different options to be there. So this was the final prototype that we built and deployed on site. And I just want to say also that we cared a lot about proportions. We were very specific about how how people might be able to sit on here and how those proportions might be ergonomically responsive. So if you can see in one direction, the seating is more elongated than the other. And this was also to help people be able to kind of sit here in a kind of enclave if they wanted to, or be able to, you know, interact with each other in different ways. And here you can see Mohsen, Marziah Zad, my partner on the project, showcasing the different ways that you can use the space. And here are all three of my partners on this project also kind of like sitting here and enjoying. But to return to this original challenge of how to contextualize an intangible concept such as identity, well, here we sort of felt that the answer is that form in itself does not evoke identity, but form creates associations. So when it triggers an emotional feeling or meaning, it begins to relate to identity. It's not about saying this is Iranian or this is Spanish, because these statements are abstractions. It's more about this observation that this makes sense where we are, and this makes sense to who I am because I'm from this space. And that's the identity that we focused on, not something that was, you know, inherently intellectual or manufactured. So moving on to a completely different project type. This was a family home in the city. And the big challenge for this project was to change the typical Iranian housing building typology through retooling the design framework, but still honoring cultural signifiers. And to kind of understand why this is a huge challenge, or this was a huge challenge for us, I want you to kind of think of yourselves as these young designers who are going to soon go out into the world and, you know, develop your projects, or maybe you've actually done a few projects before, and you have this type of an idea that you think is a really cool idea and you want to develop it for your project. Well, what happens is that the building typology that we usually see in Iran is a north-south facing housing, and adjacent to every housing is another one, unless you're on the corner of a street. So you can't really do anything with the east-west walls that you have because it's immediately adjacent to another building type. And then the next thing that happens is that a lot of housing in Iran is developed by developers. So the clients are developers, and their main idea for these projects is profit. And the way that you can have profit for housing in Iran is by square meters. So it's the client basically sells the area of the house. So if you have a terrace or an open area, you're actually just losing space, and no client will accept it because you're basically taking away the profit that the client would have. And then let's not forget that for most housing typologies, the parking space is actually below the building. And then there's also often a type of picket fence or posts that secure the building so that people can't get inside. So you basically lose the whole ground floor of the building to this, and it ends up looking like that. But if this is not bad enough, there's something more. And that's that actually, because of the cultural, because of Iranian culture, basically, homes are very introverted, so you can't really see inside of them. People have a really strong sense of privacy. So what ends up happening is that even if there are windows, you put huge curtains to protect that privacy of the house. So your amazing grand idea for what a home can look like will end up looking something like this. And here you can kind of see what that looks like actually in an affluent neighborhood in North Tehran. So here you can see how that adjacency is working. You can see that the houses are built up 100%, like as much as they can. And you know, a few terraces. And then there's also curtains in the windows so that you can't see the interior. And this is basically what the city will look like because of that. So it's not very inspiring. It's not something that any young designer aspires to. So this was the challenge that we had, was how can we break this typology basically, and how can we do something different, but still respond to cultural paradigms. So coming back to our project on the site, this site has, the project has two adjacencies. So there's one house on the east side and another house on the west. But it has two connections to the street. So there's a small street here to the south with a park in front of it, and then a more, well, it's a pedestrian street. And then the street to the north is a vehicle street, so you can take your car in through there. And this is the site that we started with. And of course, we started out with the same paradigm, that same building typology that everybody else starts out with. But then we did a few things. And the first thing is also the most important thing. We convinced the client to trust us. And I think that this is a bit understated. I think that the most important thing that we often have to do as designers, or the user or the stakeholder, trust what we're doing. Because what we did in this project is we basically convinced the client. We said, look, you're going to lose floor area in this project, but it's going to give you added value through the design. So you're still going to be able to sell this place with a profit, because there just won't be anything like this. And the spaces that are created within are places that people really want to have. Our idea behind this was actually to just do something really simple, which is to create an alleyway. And this idea for the alleyway was to kind of create connections. So the first thing that we did was we created this quote unquote alleyway on the ground floor. And then we sort of proliferated that upwards. So every other landing is also another alleyway, which is really basically just a narrow opening. But how we used that was that we actually literally reoriented the frames of the building. So if you remember what we started out with, that original paradigm is north-south lighting. That's the best lighting that you can get. And what we did was we basically said, we're not going to get direct sunlight for most of the parts of the building. Here you can see that we still have a window on, we have two windows actually on this floor that has north-south lighting, but otherwise we reoriented the building. And so we lost natural daylight, but instead we have, what we gained is a full opening where you no longer need curtains to have privacy, because nobody can actually see inside the building this way. So we sort of added a space, these alleyways that are built up vertically. And then you can do a lot of things with these spaces. So what we encourage the client to do, and what they have done, which is really exciting, is they just put a lot of greenery in these areas. So here you can kind of see how the building looks. You can see what it looks like compared to the building adjacent to it, which, as I said, like, do you see here these pickets, that sort of safety, security line, and then how the windows are really like adjacent to the wall, and then the project that we developed and how it looks. Where we did need some natural daylighting to enter the building, we actually used this patterning system with the brick to kind of like allow light to come in. And from the inside, you actually have a very good view to the outside. But from the outside, you can't really see anything that's going on inside. And here you can kind of see what those alleyways look like. This is the one that's on the very top of the building, and this is the one at street level, to sort of get an understanding of how that space can be. We took these pictures right after, like barely after the client moved in, but they've really filled up this space with greenery now. And here you can just kind of see that same view at a different time and how it looks. And that entryway at night. Something else that we really cared about in this project is materiality. It was a very subdued design. You know, it's not very iconic. It's not very eye-catching per se, but we really wanted to create this sense of place and beauty through the materiality, and really create something that maybe you can understand it through the textures and through feeling it and the light that plays with the color of the materials that we used. This is an interior void that we created to also allow for visual connection within the building. And for that idea of like an alleyway, this is the staircase connecting from the street up to the house. And then here you can see how we use a different type of materiality for the interior spaces. There's a comment in the chat. I'm trying to like see it.
No, sorry, Marcia, it's me that was telling the people that they could write their question in chat if they want.
Ah, okay. All right. Please don't ask me any questions in the chat. Go ahead and write as many things as you want in the chat, but nothing that I have to directly answer to right now because
no, don't worry. We will answer them.
Sure, great. Yeah, so just, you know, some looks for the inside of the space. This is that one window that you sort of saw facing the street. And as you can see, there's a curtain in that window. But the spaces are very open and airy, and the client really loves it. So we're very proud of this project. And that actually takes us to another housing typology in Iran, which is the residential high-rise, but for the wealthy. And in order to understand our creative impact on the city skyline in this project, you have to take all the lessons that you learned from the previous project and add to it one essential element, which is the facade. Because you can't really do anything to break up these box shapes. And because you want the building to stand out in the crowd of boxes, a paradigm sort of sprouted out in the past decade in Iran that shows affluence and wealth through this use of quote unquote classical or Roman archetypes on the facade, which employ expensive stone as the material. And the stone is quite expensive. The clients who are typically developers, they love this aesthetic because buyers love it, and buyers love it because they associate the aesthetic with luxury living and expansiveness. So the client on this project very specifically asked us to design a building that had this type of a facade. And that was a huge challenge for us because nobody wants to contribute to this skyline. I don't think that anybody here in this group of people who are at least in this particular discourse tonight would think, yeah, you know, this is a really great building and I really think it would be a good idea if I designed something like this and added it to the skyline. So this was the big challenge that we had. How do you respond to client requirements, but also adhere to your core values of authenticity and design originality? So that was the problem. And we were scrambling around to find solutions. And at some point, Mohsen, who was a partner on this project, he said, well, wait, if we want to solve authenticity, let's at least not look at Roman and classical design. And let's at least look at Persian archetypes or Iranian archetypes. It really worked to look at Islamic architecture because pre-Islamic architecture doesn't have any arcs. But these types of like classical Roman quote unquote structures that we're seeing in the city really use this type of arcs a lot. So he said, let's use these archetypes, but let's separate them from the context and actually just use them as modules. So we'll take them away from where they belong and put them into modules. And not only that, let's enclose them in a glass case. And I think that this part is the really important part or the aha moment on this project, because when you enclose anything in a glass case, you objectify it and you remove its value as an element that's connected to a context or a geography. And at that moment, you're no longer designing the object, but rather the exhibit. So you remove your connection to what is in the case and focus on the design of the case itself. And the lesson that I personally learned here is to, wait, there's more. So we took this Persian archetype and we really put it into a module, into a glass case. And then we started playing around with these modules and moving them around each other. And basically we designed the building this way. What's really nice about it is that the glass during the day really made that design invisible, and it really just reflected the environment, the sky and the surroundings. So it was really quite invisible. And then as night came on and you turned on all the lights, the client got what he wanted, which was this luxury classical design idea. So the lesson that I personally learned here is to always question your imagined limitations in design, and to know that there's always a third solution. As Elon Musk says, the constraints that you're given are guaranteed to be to some degree wrong. So the end moment was that we found a way to focus on somehow giving value to this project and giving value to these spaces. Which is a great segue into the next project, because in this project, we were very obsessed with how to give value, not necessarily external or formal design value, but value through celebrating everything that's happening inside the building and emphasizing that and putting some order to that. So as a means for background, I will introduce you to the existing building, because it's a project that begins from an existing building. And this is a 1950s chicken feed production factory that was actually built by the Swiss in Iran. And as we know, the Swiss care a lot about things working like clockwork. So the client on this project is the founder of a steel holding company, and he wants to flip this chicken feed factory into a prominent and iconic headquarters for his company, including office spaces and industrial storage for his products, and a showroom and exhibition space for marketing his products. And he wants the building to be iconic and showcase his innovative approach to both the industry and the market. But he also cared a lot about spatial equity and amenities, both for his blue collar and white collar workforce. So here you can also see how that building really stands out in the context anyway. It's taller than all of the other buildings around it. And something else that's kind of important is that it's right across the street from the Mehrabad airport, which is the largest domestic airport in Tehran. And I think in Iran also in Iran. So you can actually see the building when the plane is landing. Like from the plane, you can see it. So this was a big thing for the client, that you can see this building even as you're like landing on the tarmac. And just a few other things, background things. There's also a railroad track that's running exactly south to the project. And of course, in the front, we have the highway and a lot of industrial silos all around. It's a very industrial site, but everything is a lot smaller than this particular building. And so the client, as I said, he was looking for a really iconic building design. He wanted to really showcase himself and showcase his holding, his company through this project. But for us, we tried to kind of look at it in a different way. And for us, this project is really a study in liberating architecture from following particular building types or design expectations. And the idea was really quite conceptual. Instead of an iconic formal architecture, our goal was to make the design so transparent that it actually framed the people and the industry and the activities that are happening inside. So you can kind of think of it as a new twist on the Centre Pompidou approach, where in this case, we don't glorify the trappings of architecture, but rather we celebrate and frame the human presence and the history of the building itself. So here you can kind of see some views of the project exterior. This is the overall area with the holding and the storage spaces. And that brings us to the interior of the space, because the interior was its own process. A really important element in the interior is actually the storage space for the chicken feed, because it was a chicken feed production company, factory. And there were these chutes that they would put the chicken feed in to store it. So you can kind of see how those chutes look like from above, and then from below, this is what they would look like. And this was basically where they stored all of those grains. And to just get an idea of the scope of that, again, here, just to remind you how big the building is, this much of that building mass was just used for this storage space. So it actually encompasses 3/4 of three stories of the project. And the client really just wanted to get this out of the project. He wanted to replace it with floor slabs, and basically turn it into office space. So that was his big idea. But we said, well, wait, this is an important element in the heritage of this building. So what if we try to use it in a different way? And so what we did was we subtracted pieces from that form. And we did a lot of different subtractions. So I'm just showing you one of them here, but we actually did like, I don't know, so however many with different shapes and different ideas behind it to sort of see how we can pull things away from it. But we sort of ended up finally with this type of an arc shape that can really show that identity or show what this building used to be, but in a way that sort of glorifies it and celebrates it. And because the client has a steel holding company, we also thought that we could kind of like fix and finesse the interior of those spaces with his steel. So just to kind of see how that looks like in the building, once again, this is what that granary, that core looks like right now. And then this is what it would look like after we do that subtraction. And this would actually create a 3-level high atrium that you can, that connects all of the spaces through this core. So you can kind of see glimpses of it on all of the other stories. This is the space that the client wants to use as a showroom and exhibition space to showcase his products, and he wants to use it as a marketing area. And this is our proposal. So you can see that we really want to respect the original identity. We're not really changing anything in the ceiling or the columns. We're keeping all of that as it is. And we just have this very light touch that also kind of captures the client's or the company's identity. And here is another space that's kind of higher up. For scale, you can see that that's a little person there. This will actually turn into like a 2-story space afterwards, but you can see what it looks like now. And this is what that office space for the office employees would look like. And so here you can kind of see how we kept that connection with those core chutes by just encasing them in glass. And when you walk over them, you can actually see other spaces in the building there as well. And finally, this is the office space. So the personal office space for the client himself. And this is how we translated that into his own private office. This is just that office from another angle. And then you can see how we responded with the design that we proposed. And this is just one last space. So this project is currently in progress, and it incorporates many aspects that are outside of the scope of this talk. But for us, among many other things, working together with the client, who is both innovative and creative, has been especially rewarding and continuously energizes our work. It's really great to know that he cares about the people who work for him and the environment they work in. And this is really aligned with our own values as a practice. So this is a very exciting project to work on, and everybody's happy about it. We're happy about it. The client is happy about it. And yeah, we're in construction mode right now. But that takes me to another office building, and this office is very different from the previous one. The big challenge that we had for this project was that we believe that every urban dweller has a fundamental right to light. And I know that that seems like something that's very obvious, but I'm hoping all of the projects that I showed to you up until now can kind of give you an idea of the struggles that Iranian architects and probably architects everywhere have to face in order to solve these very fundamental issues that it seems like everybody should have. Their fundamental rights that it seems everybody should have. So the objective in this project was to optimize natural daylighting to the interior, and also do this through solutions which add value to the spatial quality and also emphasize placemaking. So to start out, to kind of show you the problem that we had, the reason why this place is called adjacent offices is because it's really like cramped in between all of these surrounding buildings. There's actually another building here that you'll be able to see in the pictures, but I didn't include in the diagrams because it would become just a bit too much. And yeah, the client wanted to have 3 typologies, office typologies that were stacked on top of each other. This was just one of the requirements that we had in the project. And then, of course, we had the issue of light. So the good thing is that this is a south-facing building, so we did have this full facade to kind of work with. But then on the other side, it's a west-facing facade, so not the best type of light. As we spoke of earlier. So our idea for this was really to kind of like carve out a space to allow the light to enter. And that was the main driver for the massing of the project. So just like, how can we take something away and through that negative space, add a positive value of light. And so this is kind of the general massing that came up afterwards. So it looks something like this. And then to kind of unify and integrate things afterwards, we did a general like massaging of the facade and the massing to kind of unify things and bring them all together. And here you can kind of see how some of those openings are working to allow light to enter spaces that normally wouldn't have any. Another thing that we did on this project is that we created an urban pathway. So I think this is something that we really like to do a lot in our projects. We did it in the Ali house project as well. And this is something that clients generally don't like, because in general, they want to build up 100% of their area, and then they want a lock and a key on the door to promote security and not have a problem, even if it's an office space. There's a door and a security guard, and he closes the door at night, or he just stands there and watches people coming in and going out. And it was a bit of a challenge for us to convince the client to create this connection. But our idea was that if there's an urban connection between 2 streets, that will actually be welcoming and it will draw people into the project. And for the client, this iconic aspect of the building was really important. So it would actually create a further connection and welcoming and really bring people into the space, which is what the client wanted to happen. And besides, the building is off the main thoroughfare, so you actually had to go past an existing building to get back here. And we just thought that emphasizing that connection would actually promote people to feel more welcomed and feel okay to enter the space. So here you can kind of see from this drone footage how that connection can look. And from the street level view, this is that bridge that we made to create that connection. And this is what the view looks like from under the entrance. And here is really like underneath the entrance so that you can see how that connection looks. So the other thing that we did is we actually thought about people who are using the underground level. So there is some spaces that are being used under this podium. And as our idea was, you know, a right to light, we created these sunken wells that we also filled with green spaces, which really emphasize that bridge connection, but that also really brings light into recessed areas underneath the building. And here you can kind of see how those connections are really helping the project. So there's all of these like visual connections through these dynamic spaces that otherwise wouldn't exist. And here you can see how that vertical dynamic connection is happening when you look up to the building as well. The last thing that is important about this project is just the facade system that we used. So our idea was to somehow integrate this massing through a geometric system. And in this case, we use strip morphologies. And we use them to kind of create a sense of basically interconnection between positive and negative space going through each other. So the terraces are created through this system. And these ribbons basically at some points they continue through the building into the interior. So here you can see how that facade system is creating these connections on the facade, like moving towards the interior of the building, and how those open spaces are being generated. So just a few views to kind of bring things all together about the project. You can really see the client's request for having 3 vertical stacked systems, but we use this like smoothing strip morphologies to kind of like really create an interplay between positive and negative space that specifically emphasizes placemaking and spatial quality. And consequently in this project, the visual connections are really prominently featured and form and space really complement each other synergetically. But something that's really important about this project is that as much as the design is very dynamic, but the project itself is very, the materials are very simple and the construction method is very low cost. And very familiar to local workers and contractors. And in this project, when we put our energy into, you know, a dynamic and iconic design with really easy constructability, we were able to use, you know, the digital tools and skills that we learned at IAAC and combined together with really cost-effective materials and simple construction systems to really create a novel design outcome. And in this project, we really privileged like regionally sourced construction materials, and throughout the construction process, local labor and experience was favored. So as ambitious as the design was, the construction of it was really, really simple. And we also tried to find ecological solutions in other small parts of the building as well. So here, all of the plants use an Oya irrigation system. And the Oya irrigation system is basically an ancient irrigation method that uses these types of like unglazed porous clay pots that are buried within the root zones of the plants, and then water is poured into there and it naturally seeps into the soil, providing a continuous supply of water to the plants, but using a very natural irrigation method, which also reduces consumption. So this was something that we were really happy about. And here you can kind of see how that's working. But moving away from buildings and into the public domain, that brings us to Darangah No.6. So in the summer of 2019, Tehran's Department of Urban Repair and Beautification assigned 15 architects to rehabilitate a series of underused and recessed urban spaces located in underrepresented neighborhoods in the inner city. And the objective was to transform these leftover car-dominated recessed plots into a vibrant public urban amenity. And myself and Raha Ashrafi, my partner, we were assigned Darangah No.6. So considering the social politics of top-down urban intervention and often well-founded impression of underprivileged communities, which is where this site is located, that their rights and their well-being are insignificant to urban planners and city officials, we really expected a strong pushback to any proposal we would present to the neighborhood. And so consequently, really early on, we established this foundational reasoning that the success or failure of such a project would depend largely on engagement and interest from the resident community and stakeholders. So this is the site that we have to work with. And our design process began with a series of on-site meetings with really low attendance and well-founded cynicism on behalf of the community. Locals really responded defensively and suspiciously to our inquiries about their needs and desires for a small plaza space that's adjacent to their homes. They worried a lot about the disruption to their routines and the relocation of their informal parking spaces that you saw in the previous image to an area that's outside of their protective view. And mindful of these challenges, we really began to slowly build a rapport and credibility with the community. And through careful consideration of each participant's opinions and their concerns, we were able to create an inclusive platform for communication and idea sharing to inform our creativity and decision-making while gaining the trust of the stakeholders as well. And back in the studio, our big challenge was to kind of develop an adaptive framework that could functionally respond to those indicators and concerns that were presented by the stakeholders. And ultimately, we defined a sort of simple, repetitive geometry that was flexible enough to fluidly take on different functional characteristics while lightly, solving other issues that we'll get into later on. So the big idea was modularity is good. You can do a lot of things with modularity. And for this project, we developed this type of like flexible module that's a 2.5 by 2.5 meter in size. And that's then subdivided into triangles. Another thing to kind of keep in mind is that at some point we decided that, look, for this space, we have some limitations on what we can do for the project. We have like budget limitations and also what the users want and what can benefit them. And so we really sort of thought that it's good to have a very light footprint and not to do that much. And so our idea was, let's just kind of create a carpet for that plaza space. And as long as the design can, oh, sorry, I forgot to say that 2.5 by 2.5 module is very functional because the whole idea was to be able to like allocate a specific parking space through using that pattern. And we really just wanted it to kind of be evocative of a Persian carpet. So obviously it's not at all related. The geometry is not even necessarily really Iranian, but it has that type of a foundational connection that we were trying to use. So just to remind you what the space looked like before. And then here with the implementation of our design, and we made sure to maintain the 5 parking spaces for the people that were living adjacent to here. They could see the cars from their house, which sort of made them feel like they could protect them. And there was a lot of other cars in this area as well, but we didn't really fit them into the scope of the project, and we felt like they don't really live adjacent to the space, and this is really just a small scale space that belongs to the neighborhood, so they can go find a parking lot elsewhere. Basically, that was the idea that we had. And then when it came to building materials, that was another really exciting challenge for us because the budget that was allotted to each design team for the design and construction was really little. And that really just substantiated our inclination to find creative and ecologically aware solutions for the construction and material sourcing process. And what we did is our team contacted local construction material providers and distributors to inquire about material leftovers with deficiencies. And then through this strategy, we were able to source materials that would otherwise be considered waste materials and at a fraction of the anticipated cost. So we had to incorporate like transportation and storage as part of the cost, but otherwise like these manufacturers were really happy to just get rid of their leftover materials. And this was actually also helpful for a healthier rainwater drainage and reduction in the urban heat island effect in the adjacency to the plaza. But another really great benefit to using a globally implemented adaptive geometric pattern was the modularization of the construction system. So these modular elements allow for streamlining the construction process through repetition and breaking down a large global design into smaller manageable pieces. And what was really great about that is that this consequently facilitated strategies for community participation and agency in the construction process that would not otherwise be possible. So during a week-long workshop led by Raha, my partner, and our design team, and of course all of the neighborhood stakeholders, the community members of all genders and ages came together to construct the most ornamental elements of this geometric modules. And what was really inspiring for us about this project is that through creating a dialogue with stakeholders, we advocated for the neighborhood to feel agency and autonomy to design and build their public spaces they would prefer with their own personal flair and their own taste. And the participation offered the community a sense of pride and ownership and placemaking through the involvement and engagement that would otherwise have been a lost opportunity in the project. And what's really important is that we learned that the public is really interested in what architecture really is and not that simplification of it. And that dialogue really creates a sense of ownership for people. So here you can kind of see how the project will look. It's still under construction now. Which brings me to the second to last project. This is called the Silk Tree Park. It's in the south of Tehran, which is generally, we have all of these projects in the south of Tehran, the urban projects that are like really for underprivileged communities, which is great for us because we like to really focus on them and create beautiful spaces for them. But this project is designed in accordance with spatial guidelines for deaf and HOH individuals. And the objective was to design more inclusive urban environments, especially catering to hard of hearing individuals, as the park was also adjacent to a sports center for the deaf. And we explored how special needs can enrich design and how the design of natural and built environments can foster playful interaction and empathy between people from all walks of life. So to sort of start out with this project, it started before the project started. So Raha, my partner, she's the Ashrafi part of Ashrafi Zad. She did this, she ran or led this studio at the Tehran Urban Innovation Center, along with a group of really talented students, or researchers, I should say. I don't like to call them students. Nava Khulusi, Nima Ghanei, and two others. And we sort of brought Nima and Nava into the office team after that. So this was one of the nice things that happened about this project. But what they did in this studio was they really tried to think about how to make Tehran a more inclusive city. And because it's really hard to be inclusive for everyone, they really just tried to focus on one group. And they focused on the deaf and HOH individuals. So the outcome of this studio was a handbook that has 101 tips for all designers who want to make urban spaces more deaf friendly. And I'm not going to go into all of them, but there were two points that came in that we used in the project. And that is that the hearing space for a person who has hearing ability is a bit smaller than the personal bubble around deaf or HOH individuals, because they need to be able to see your hand gestures. So whereas if you're not hard of hearing, you might stand closer together, they actually want to stand a little bit farther back so that they can see each other's hands. And another important thing is that in urban settings, it's very difficult for them to sit on linear benches because they want to be able to see each other to watch each other sign. And so that a circular space is actually more conducive for them to be able to interact with each other, because they can actually kind of sit in a circle and watch each other. And then another thing that was really important that we actually used in this project is that there's a distance, an ideal distance that deaf people can communicate with each other. So if you get too far out of that zone, then it's actually not conducive for them to be able to appreciate that environment. So these were things that we learned on 101 other tips, but these are the 3 that I'm going to focus on to explain this project. So just to give you an idea, this was the site location, and this is our project design, like implemented onto that space. Right back here is that sports center for the deaf that I was talking about earlier. We actually really wanted to just create a connection directly through to the park from there, but that wasn't something that was viable. The city didn't allow us to open up that part of the project.
Yeah, Marcia, I don't know how many slides do you have more, but we don't have much more time.
Oh, okay. I have one more project to talk about. So,
okay.
Yeah, I'll just pass through this one really quickly. So just to kind of keep in mind that circular space and the particular radius allows for HOH individuals to be able to talk with each other a lot easier. But then not only that, in this space, we also made sure to put greenery around the project so that people, whoever is actually within that space, if they're hard of hearing, they wouldn't suddenly have someone walk up behind them just because there's no pathway for that to happen. We also had these parasols that we specifically designed for this space. So the points on them are that they're a lot more elongated, and they're also diagonal to the axis, and this allows for more space for people to be able to see each other and connect without something that's obstructing their view. And here you can kind of see what that looks like in the space, and just how that was implemented onto the area. So we also made these connections with the wall and the green space to further create a connection for people to a green urban area. It's just another view. We were also very careful to make sure that the space was inclusive for everyone in terms of accessibility. So even though there was a big grade in the site, there's no steps anywhere in the project, so you can walk through with a wheelchair or with a stroller. Here are just some close views. These will eventually, the plants will grow up onto them. Just the children enjoying the space. And we also brought in a group of our friends in the deaf community to try out the space and see if they liked it. One day, very recently, actually a few weeks ago. And what we really learned about this project is that the right alchemy can make a disempowered or unseen group really feel empowered and really feel that they're valued. So often whoever's the majority in a social framework tends to mandate how things ought to be, and that is a sort of injustice. And in this project, we really tried to bring a certain justice of space to design to create equal inclusion and an opportunity to be seen and understood. And that brings me to the last project of the night, so bear with me 6 minutes more, please. This project, the last project that I will talk about, it's actually our last project that's in progress right now with a team of at least 70 people just leading the different disciplines in order to make it happen. And I'm very proud to say that it's one of the largest public domain projects happening in Tehran in this past year. And construction has already begun and it's expected to be complete in the next 24 months, so 2 years from now. But the whole project started from really humble beginnings, and our small team of designers kind of planted a seed with a big dream. So the idea was to think about design justice. And this term, by the way, is not a term that I use. It's been coined by Sir David Adjaye. And we found this challenge to be very compelling. So this project, again, is also in an underprivileged community. Oh, oops, sorry about the noise.
No, don't worry, we cannot hear it.
Oh, you can't hear it, that's great. Okay, I'll try to talk through it. So the idea was like to create this connection through a divide that happened. This highway disconnected these two different, this neighborhood that used to be one neighborhood was disconnected through it. And our idea was to kind of reconnect these two neighborhoods through the green spaces that, through green spaces that we could basically create around it. So this is kind of like an idea of what the project would look like. And how we did that was to identify these green plazas that would exist around the project and then really bring people directly into the project. And then on the green bridge, basically reconnect back to the neighborhood through these green typologies, which would also create some small circular spaces that are directly connected to the city, which allow for gathering spaces basically, and then the rest of the spaces can be used for movement and sports. And this is kind of what it looks like. Another important aspect of the project was that we cared about the people who are moving around from underneath the highway as well, and what their experience is as commuters. So usually if you're in commute, you're going through a tunnel or you're just on the highway and it's really depressing. And so our idea was to kind of like give them a glimpse of that green space that can happen through here. So here you can kind of see what that looks like. And these are some of those plazas that we connected, kind of stitched the neighborhoods to the project with. And also that connection to the highway that's happening underneath. And then just some views of how the project is working. We had two commercial spaces. One is working as a kind of like Saturday market where people can come and sell their goods. And here you can kind of see the spaces where people will sort of move around on the project, on the site, and really have a sense of very open space in this very dense urban environment. This is another commercial space that was mandated by the client, but you can see a really beautiful view to the Alborz mountains from here. And just some top views from this project. So I'll let this run through because I think that the visualizer who works on this did an amazing job. So I feel like everyone has a right to see it. So in conclusion, clarity regarding these projects often came after the project had finished. But throughout, we pursued a curious and investigative approach where all options are on the table and all angles are equally important. So to answer this question of how can architects be relevant, well, maybe it's the power of architecture to shape societies. Maybe it's about how we can retool technology to be more responsive to society, like help society, and be more responsive in terms of equity, appropriateness, and stewardship of the planet. A friend of mine recently said to me, we live in a world where intellectual competence is the most prized quality. Civilization is portrayed as a direct result of organized intelligence put to work. And this is true for the technical aspects of our lives, like architecture, medicine, and communication. But when it comes to intangible concepts like identity or belonging, we get entangled in very obscure ways. So we have this 21st century issue that is about people from diverse origins coming to new places and creating new citizenship and ideas. And I think that we have to deal with these intangible issues, and we need to create narratives around them, and we need to include everyone in that frame. We've been obsessed with an architecture of singularity for a very long time, which is about reinforcing the self and the me, and we need to move that into an architecture that is more about us. And that is all for tonight. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks, Fabio and Vicente and everyone. I'll stop my screen sharing now.
Thank you, Marcia. Wonderful projects, very interesting lecture, very interesting. Thank you. I will go. I mean, I have been collecting some questions as direct message, because I think that people will follow in your lead, not to interrupt with the question. we have Fatem here in the general chat that says, I would like to know how you negotiate with clients to convince them to move and act more responsible about their context and environment.
You know, that's such a good question. And all of the projects that we have are so client oriented. So it's a big deal and the client always knows what they want. They know what they want. So you can't really cheat them or you know, change their mind about things, because they really know what works. I've learned a lot from the clients that we had. And I have to say that it's two things that you need to do. One is that you really need to create a dialogue with the client and really gain their trust. So as long as the client knows that you're on their side and that you're not going to try and have your own private agenda, they actually listen to you a lot more. And I've realized that a lot of the work that we do is just kind of teaching the client about opportunities. So something that's really nice about us as designers is that we have all this training to, you know, beautify our cities and make places that are better for people. But that's because these are our internal concerns. These are things that we're always thinking about, and clients and people at large are maybe thinking about other things. And if you can kind of like pull them into that dialogue, you'll often be surprised that they care. People tend to care about a lot of things. And then there are also clients who don't care about anything, and we have those clients as well. We have projects that I'm not showing tonight. And what I've really learned is to, as a designer, you can also choose your clients. You know, it's kind of like that Uber thing where, you know, that you grade them and they grade you. So one thing that I think is really helpful is to just, over time, kind of move towards a clientele, you know, as your work is developing, move towards a clientele whose interests align with yours, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think we have several questions that goes in the same direction. Another ones that just Sahan wrote, they say, thanks for the great lecture. How does collective decision making starts, like the workshop you made, you convince them to be serious in the process? Think.
Yeah, that's a really great question. It takes, I think that one of the biggest things is building rapport with people. If they don't trust you and they don't think that you actually want to do anything for them, or you don't have their interests in mind, they just want to have fun and make fun of you, and this happens a lot. But then at the same time, people, it's kind of similar to what I said about the clients, like people care about things, they care about their spaces, they care about their environments. And something that happens a lot is that we have so much mediocre urban spaces, and not in Barcelona. I love a lot of urban spaces in Barcelona. It's one of my, like, it's my favorite city in the world. But there's a lot of cities who don't have those type of dynamic urban spaces, and people don't even realize what they're missing. They don't even realize what they don't have. And so once you show things to them, once you show them the possibilities, once you really create that dialogue of you have rights and these are things that can belong to you too, then and it really takes one person. This is something that I've learned. It takes one person to take things seriously and be like, I want this. And then suddenly everyone's thinking about the things that they want and contributing to that dialogue because they don't want to be left behind. So yeah, just build rapport and don't give up. And take yourself seriously too. If you don't take yourself seriously, no one's going to take you seriously either.
That's a very good point, really. Yeah, as I say, there are many questions in the same sense. Have any one of such participatory intervention changed the initial design intention, but still remaining functional?
Yes, this happens often. And this is one of the challenges of participatory design because we're designers. So there's things that we want to do. You know, we have this idea and we think like this could be really good and people could really like it, and then they really don't. and it really changes the entire narrative. You know. But what I've learned is really helpful is we think that we know better because we're designers, and we really don't. You know, the only thing that we really know is the skills and tools that we use to manipulate design. Like that's what we have, that's our tool set. And beyond that, we're really not this all knowledgeable oracle. And as soon as we put that aside and we stop thinking about ourselves that way and just really listen to other people, I learned many times that they know a lot more than we do, and they know a lot better than we do. When we visited the Silk Tree Park with the deaf community, they told us all of the things that we had done wrong. The lighting was not ideal. There was one space that needed to be smaller so that they could sign with each other more familiarly. There was other problems in the project as well that we learned through them to fix later on. For the participatory design projects, when we listen to people, it's a challenge because you're going in a direction and then you have to like move the direction that you're going in. But it has always made the project more rich and more inclusive, and I don't think any of us have ever regretted it.
Great. Have different questions here. Do you think that the constraints of the clients became an obstacle, or did they fuel your creativity?
No, they always fuel creativity. Again, this really depends on the client because we do have clients that are just like, I just want this and no, and no, and no. And that whole no concept really is a huge obstacle in itself. But if there's no, but instead we're working towards a common goal, which is to produce a good project for the end user or for the clients, then everything comes together really well. And it always enriches the project. And it always ends up with an outcome that we're all happy with. So the client is happy with and we're happy with it also.
Yeah. Marco just wrote, thank you very much for the lecture. Could you please expand a bit about the form and identity, especially the Chalipa project?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So something that me and my collaborators and partners are obsessed with is this idea of how we can use technology to cater to identity. So how can you use these, how can you basically respond to these very intangible concepts like identity? What does that even mean? And for that, especially in the Chalipa project, what we realized is that it doesn't need to be something that's obviously Persian. Like we don't need to go and take a Persian mosque dome and put it there, or an Iranian mosque dome and put it there on site for everyone to say, yeah, this belongs here. Instead, what we can do is really go into the depth of what makes something ours. And in this case, we decided to just touch on an structural archetype, the 9 square. The 9 square is not something that's unique to Iran in any sense, but the particular proportions that we have in Iran is very Iranian. And so we really just kind of like dive deep into those proportions, and we really use that grid very specifically. So it's not that we had this grid and then we formed things within it. We actually quite literally like touched the points in creating each of those curves that we then lofted together to develop the form. So like I said in the lecture, it's not something that you can necessarily, the form is not an indicator of identity in itself, but it sort of creates this sense of connection that is more amorphous and intangible, and it's also a little bit more deep-rooted, that you kind of get this sense that this belongs here, this is because I'm here, and this is here, and I can connect with this somehow.
Yeah. I don't know if there are any other questions or if someone wants to open the microphone, but in any case, I mean, knowing a bit about your profile, I had like two other questions I would like to ask you. The first one has to do with parametric design. I mean, what's the role of parametric design in this architecture you has been showing? Because I think it is not obvious, but I think it's very important.
Thanks. That's such a good question. I love these types of questions because I wouldn't really consider myself a parametric designer by any long shot. I think that the ideas about what makes something parametric and what doesn't is also really open to a discourse. You know, it can also even be a bit contentious talking about this. But what I can say is that my training at IAAC and the sort of ideas that it gave to me moving forwards, ever onwards, is really about digital tools, generative design systems, and systems that basically remove that subjectivity of the designer. And instead of being a designer who's like this top-down decision maker on a project, it instead, these tools, these digital tools, or as you're saying, parametric design, actually provides us with a framework. And we designed that framework based on the inputs that we're receiving from different places. And that framework then guides the design ever afterwards. So there's no concept behind a particular project that we kind of adhere to a concept, but rather there's a framework, and that framework tells us how to develop the design.
Great. Well, before my last question, I would like to leave space to Calypso, who is asking. Well, she or he has a proposal and also a question. Such a great lecture. I would like to know how the users of the spaces reacted to this new, for them, aspects of architecture at the end. Maybe think that something more usual to the eye still these days is often something more powerful than an innovative solution of an architect, especially for a culture like this. Those an architect needs also to consider how to teach a new way of living to the people or citizens.
Yes, this is such a good question, and it's really spot on. And it's actually something that Raha and I and my other partners, we often talk about it, is that a lot of what we produce, even though I would say most of it is understated, I don't think that our projects in any way are that iconic. Well, there's a few of them that are maybe a bit more iconic, but in general, they're very quiet and they really like sit within the context. But even that can be very unusual for people. And it's true, there is a certain, people are a little bit afraid of what they don't know, so they don't know how to interact with it. They don't know what to expect from it, and it is an issue. But I'm not sure that the solution to that, and this is something that maybe it depends on, you know, how this dialogue continues and how we continue to think about things. But I don't think the solution is to just stay within that, you know, comfortable ground that we're all familiar with. I think that we're moving forward as a society, whether we like it or not. Like every decade has a new issue that collectively and globally we're kind of facing it. And I think that often design is a platform to create a discourse with that, that can be very constructive, which is also the title of my lecture, to kind of have a constructive narrative about things. And so in order for that to happen, I think we really have to push people and push ourselves. So we have to constantly challenge ourselves about these points where it's better to stay close to something that we know or to just go out into uncharted territories. And I think that it's not either or, like we shouldn't be very radical and fanatic and then do something that we'll really hate ourselves for doing 10 years from now. But at the same time, we really shouldn't stay put because that's a stagnant position and I don't think it helps anyone.
Yeah, that's a very clear message. Well, we don't have much more time left, but maybe I would like to close the night. I would like you to develop a bit about the idea of identity, and also what do you think is the role of identity in this contemporary world we're living? That now is more globalized than ever with the pandemic and everything going online and stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something that we're always thinking about and always talking about with people at the office and with all of my friends, because all of my friends have the exact same questions and concerns about how everything is. And I think in a small way, how I would respond to that is that identity is really different for different places. I think an easy way for designers to tap into identity is to really understand geography. Often who we are is really rooted in the geography of a space. And I know that that seems like it's a very superficial, or I shouldn't say superficial, but very obvious answer to that question, but it's actually really, really true. If you really just try to understand the geography of a particular space, it can tell you a lot about the people who also live there, because people are always interacting with their environment. And so there's some reactions from the environment that are happening to us. And then we also, push ourselves onto the environment as well. So that connection, that back and forth movement between people and the environment around them, I think is what really creates that identity. And that's something that we can really tap into as designers and really try to understand. But then also another thing that's really important, and this was what I was talking about earlier, is this 21st century problem. Like, we're all these diverse people who are coming from different places, and we go to these new places, and in those new places we bring with us our identities. And so there's this push and pull with how these different and diverse people can interact with each other and really create a dialogue and new ideas and a new sense of citizenship. So as much as we're connected to the local, we're also really reaching out to each other globally. And so there's this small, or I should say this delicate space where within each project we have this adaptation that happens. And that's really important in that dialogue, to sort of see how that adaptation can happen to respond to the local context and the local people, but still keep in mind that we're all connected in a global network. And I think a lot of that can also happen, this global connectivity can happen through a sense of design conscience and really caring about the stewardship of the planet, because we only have this one planet. And so we have to do as well as we can by it. And I think that this is something that more and more people are really concerned about and thinking about.
Thank you, Marcia. This has been really a very, very interesting conversation. Also, the projects were fascinating. I'm really glad you managed to solve the technical issues
Oh
of
my
the
God.
last minute.
If everybody knew what we were all going through 10 minutes before, I had a knight in shining armor bring his computer to my office, and like it's been great.
Great. Thank you again, Marcel. I would like to see you again soon. Well, keep sharing experiences and opinions and debating about these topics.
Thanks,
Marcia, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicente. It's always a pleasure.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.